Hi, Jason.
Joey.
I loved Shotgun Wedding. I've seen it twice already. I
Oh,
actually
great.
I saw like a screener of it, and then I realized this morning I was like, I have nothing to do today. It's already on Amazon. I think it's really fun. I think it's a really great showcase for what Jennifer Lopez does really well.
Yeah,
I'm glad that we are in an era of realizing how much of a grounded comedic actress that she is. So,
yeah.
long roundabout way of saying thank you for taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you. Well, it's nice to spend time with you. Thank for enjoying the movie, and I think that was actually one of the reasons when I heard Jennifer was playing that part, I was like, oh, she gets to show a lot of what she does well.
Hmm.
Sort of dramatic, comedic, and physical, and stunty, and pratfalls, and her heart. It was a fun one to work on, to sort of see all those things in one place with her.
Yeah, she has. I kept saying when I watched it the second time, I was like, oh wow, they really put her through it. This movie. I mean, everyone, but it's just sort of like we have this idea of her as this international global goddess, and she's like falling on her face, getting dragged around. It's really great.
I
Um,
actually said to her, I was like kind of early on, I was like, I want to watch you come undone, because that's not something
mm,
people see very often. I mean, it'll be your version of coming undone, but she was kind of really into that. And we did put her through it, but I always had in my mind the Super Bowl performance. And I thought, well,
yeah.
I mean, nothing is as amazing and hard as that. So she can do this.
The stamina.
The stamina. She has a dancer's discipline in all across everything.
Mhm.
So she comes prepared. She does it full out until it's right.
Mhm.
It's like it is kind of a, I guess I come from the theater, so I think of it this way, but it is kind of a theater mentality in a way.
Yeah.
Which you can see because now she runs an empire and does
Mhm.
all things, and it has that
She's
precision.
everywhere. Yeah. Yeah, she has that when people talk about like professional, anytime that, you can tell that she comes prepared that way. I can tell that as an audience member. Um,
What it does, it makes everyone else up their game, because they're like,
mhm.
I'm not going to mess up the take.
You don't want to be the person that like Jennifer Lopez is like, come on, guys, come on.
Yeah, so it
Yeah.
it had that other kind of like subtle effect, which it dawned on me a couple weeks into it, that everyone else was like noticing that.
I love that. Okay.
Hmm.
In a general sense, I kind of wanted to ask you, this is gonna sound maybe kind of silly, but I feel like I grew up, my coming of age was in an era of like romantic comedies that people sort of look down on almost.
Hmm.
I feel like
What were some of those?
I was a big You've Got Mail fan.
Roundabout way of me asking how old you are, but I'm not going to ask that. I'm just going to ask you what movies they are.
Um, I
What were they?
remember like You've Got Mail. I was
Yeah,
a big fan of
yeah,
The Wedding Planner, not to bring it,
totally.
but there's something about I don't know, there's something about that style of film that I think is actually way harder to pull off than people give it credit for. So I was curious if maybe in a general sense, like what are some of your favorite, comedies that play with romance and comedy? I don't want to say rom-com, but I mean like,
Yeah.
the oeuvre of this sort of buffet of things you get to play all around in.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I do think sometimes rom-coms trade in a currency that is really universal, and so some people think that's cliche, and some people think that
Hmm.
that is universal and therefore worth watching again. And I think people also have different sort of senses of what comedy is, whether it's left of center and laugh out loud, or it's kind of cute. So I think a romantic comedy is kind of a broad spectrum of stuff.
Hmm.
And it really, I think it depends on the viewer in so many ways. I mean, I think my favorite Jennifer Lopez romantic comedy is Made in Manhattan.
I love
Um,
that.
Probably also because I wanted to move to New York, so it had that extra romance of that going on for me.
Yeah.
But I think that I had certainly like Romancing the Stone. I had
Love it.
True Lies. I was like the
Ah,
kind of
True Lies.
yeah, the kind of 90s. I mean, it's a gigantic movie, but it at its core, that movie is about a relationship. And
Hmm.
so, and I think that when you have really good grounded actors at the center, then you can have all that kind of circus around them, and you always come back to sort of a square one that allows you to be kind of crazy, which is I kind of like. Pitch Perfect functions that way. So does Avenue
Yeah.
Q. So,
Hmm.
I think that I think it's a really big genre, and people want to see themselves in it, or they want to see an aspirational version of themselves in it.
Yeah.
And I think people's also relationship with romantic comedies change. When you
Yeah.
haven't been married, when you've been in a relationship, when you've been divorced and remarried, they kind of resonate differently with people. I found that this
Hmm.
one was particularly interesting because I asked a lot of people about their weddings, like
Oh
just
yeah.
that
Okay.
as I got to know the actors, that was an easy entry point of like,
Mm.
what is your experience of weddings, and how'd you get married? And obviously that's a fascinating discussion with all of them, particularly Jennifer. And I think that, the way that you have looked at relationships or experienced them informs the way you look at romantic comedies.
Yeah, I feel like, especially in the last like 3 years, especially, I feel like we have sort of reevaluated our relationship with them too. Maybe just because, I like that you use the word aspirational because I do remember anytime I saw a female led romantic comedy where if there was like a montage that started in like Chicago, I was like, I am in, like give it to me.
Yeah,
Um,
totally.
yeah, so I mean, now that I'm a little older and I just watched Made in Manhattan like a week ago. Um, and it got me excited in a completely different way, I think, than when I was 18.
Yeah.
Um, okay. I also wanted to ask you about you do a lot of I love that you do a lot of big ensemble comedy work too. I think I realized the second time that I watched it, my favorite thing, that's like my favorite thing to watch just because I love how somebody can change the mood of a scene with just like one line or cutting to somebody else that's in there. Um, just wondering, maybe was that something that you sensed when you first, read the script, or is that something you really wanted to push? Because you have a really great ensemble of actors here.
That's a really interesting question. I'd never thought of it like that, but when you point it out, like Pitch Perfect, Sisters,
I
Avenue
just watched Sisters
Q,
like 2 days ago.
yeah, Avenue Q, even Shrek kind of have a lot of do have a lot of characters and ensembles. I think that's actually probably it's a musical theater thing. Like
Mm,
it's usually a main lead pairing and a secondary and a C
yeah.
story in the sort of classic 50s ways. There was like the comic relief and all that. Those things have all blended together. But I think that I find it really satisfying for me personally, in seeing other shows. Hairspray is a great example that
Mm,
everybody knows, where like you have all these characters and they all sort of pay off somehow. So you're extra
mm,
invested. And I think also I like the theme of families, and inherently ensembles are stories about family, just whether they're in conflict or not.
mhm.
So I think I do. I think I recognized it was probably, I didn't think about that so overtly, but now I'm going to think about that when I read stuff, is the ensemble quality. But what I get greedy about is like, there's a lot of great roles for actors here, places for them to shine, and
Mhm.
places for them. I've said it on set before, like I like having a little competition on screen, people kind of vying for their space.
Yeah.
uh, Again, that makes people be in the moment. It makes people be funnier. It makes people take bigger risks within their realm of safety. And so I think I like that. Um, Also, since we're talking a little bit about theater, that it feels like those pool scenes feel like theater scenes because everyone's in
Yeah.
the moment, everyone's on camera, no one's doing off camera half acting. And so there's kind of like you can kind of feel the scene take place in front of you. And that's not always true in filmmaking, but it is always true when you're making theater.
I did want to ask about the pool scenes because I feel like that, first of all, I kept thinking, I was like, what would it be like to be in that pool for at a time? And I actually wanted to, because that's where the Al B musical moment takes place. I feel like that's a really great explosion of stuff that you do really well as a director. Like the absurdity that everyone is at gunpoint having a wedding celebration while they're singing this song that I regret to inform everybody that I proudly sang at karaoke many times.
It's a hard song to sing.
That is a hard song. I was usually very drunk when I sang that song.
Yeah, that helps.
But I wanted to ask about like the um the difficulty of those scenes because on the face they probably look very simple. Everyone's just in a pool, but everyone is bouncing off one another since we're talking about ensembles. Just because I always chuckled when we would come back to those scenes, especially like when Jennifer would have a line. She's like, Robert, he's calling on you again. Like those lines make me laugh so much. Um, yeah.
Well, you were very right to point that out. I mean, this movie kind of zigzags in tones, and that's a great example of
Yeah.
the movie has just gotten really kind of serious, and it has like guns are being fired and it seems life threatening, and so you then have to kind of balance it with this thing that is real to some extent but still very funny and very silly. And that's one of the things that, you know, actors who can move in both of those spaces, dramatic and comedic, and know the difference, can help shape that and drive it. I mean, the pool scenes actually going into it was the thing I was most worried about.
Yeah.
Because I had 9 days, but I had, you know, 9 lead actors and 30 wedding guests, and it was like I was imagining like a bacterial infection in the pool, or like people getting in and out of their wet clothes and trying to get out, or people being tired of it, or people getting hot. And you know what? It ended up being, well, partially because we planned for it. I did rehearse it like theater. I rehearsed it like you do rehearse a Broadway show. We went to a parking lot, we put down a grid, and all the actors rehearsed their spacing on a grid. I made them memorize where on the grid they were, which is what dancers and actors on
Right.
rather than like put down marks, because I knew that we couldn't put down marks in water. Like they had to be in control of it for themselves. So we had all these things around the pool that were essentially like, you know, log points where they could look. We rehearsed it dry, then we rehearsed it wet, out of costume. So we rehearsed it quite a bit so that we only had 9 days to shoot. It's like 20 minutes of the movie, I think. And it meant it had that theater feel of everyone knew what was going on when they came in, so it made it happen easier. But also they were free to improv because they knew it already. And the ending result was the pool was so lovely and so warm. No one ever left it. Like I kept trying to get out. They just kind of paddled around and talked to each other. I wore like some like these like things where I could jump in the pool with the camera to talk to someone and then jump out, and I'd be dry in 2 minutes. It was actually ended up being super, super fun, but it was the thing I was most worried about going in.
Even like when some scenes starts, I was just like, even the water is just really calm. Like, how the hell did you guys do that? That was
yeah, I thought it was I think we both all worried. It's like most things, we worried so much about it and planned for it, and we had really smart people, so when we got there on the day, it actually went quite well.
Yeah. Okay. I want to talk about some of the action in this movie. I love that kitchen scene. That is like 8 minutes of genre bending joy, in my opinion. Like
I love that.
The person who's attacking them like literally jumping on Josh's head and hitting him. It's a good example of like the brutality of some of the things, which I was surprised at some of the like
and if you look very closely though, he's holding a lobster. He's defending himself with a lobster.
Oh my God.
It goes by really fast, but yeah, trying to balance those things in every frame. Think about like, okay, this is kind of violent and action.
Yeah.
How can we keep it funny? Because that's the tone challenge.
Yeah, like Jen hitting her head and seeing the blood and falling down, and I mean, it reminded me of even like the absurdity of the finale with they're on a boat tethered with a parachute. Arden is there shooting people, which is just really funny. So I guess I guess you could tell me like the key of that is to just were you just purposely looking for the funny in everything? Is that how the help?
Yeah, I mean, I try to do that anyway, because when you're trading in comedy, you know, you really are trading in laughs to a great extent. And I think of it like people watch it in their living rooms, but I've also screened it many times, and I listen to the audience like you do. And so we all talked very consciously about it. Like this is gonna, if you the deaths, they are pretty violent, and there are a lot of there's a high body count, but they all are also pretty cartoony. Like if you imagine them animated, they actually make a lot of sense. And so
Yeah.
it's more realistic, but some of the tone is still pretty broad. And so I think it kind of keeps you in a slightly edgy, but more safe zone for doing sort of more action, more violence. But we also wanted to plan the action because it's only funny if you can sort of relate to the characters in the situation.
Hmm.
So in situations where they could talk to each other or plan for something or hide, and sort of trying to think of like how you create situations where the comedy can come through. Because if you just have a high speed car chase, there's very little that's funny about that. There's no room for comedy.
Yeah.
Cars going at 16 miles an hour. So I'm looking for ways to allow it to come through. And Jennifer and Josh were excellent at thinking about how do we twist this, which made it great.
Yeah. Okay. The fact that you can like have a yelling match about the status of your relationship as you're running from armed pirates with really creative, I will say, masks on their face. Those are really I'm big
Yeah,
into costuming, so I was like really fascinated with the
Mitchell did a great job. We talked a lot about Burning Man and what kind of found objects that you could make things out of. That, and if you look close, they're all made out of bottle caps and soccer balls.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
He's
that's great.
brilliant.
Jennifer's character has a line before all hell breaks loose that stuck with me both times that I watched it, that I think is said in a, she says it with a lot of conviction, and it doesn't ever get lost, but it is never hit over your head in a very like cloying way, where she says, I'm a grown woman, I don't want my daddy walking me down the aisle, I don't need a registry, I have my own things. I feel like if this was a movie made in 2002, maybe that character might not say that. I was curious maybe about grounding emotion there. And it also has something to do with like, I feel like some movies you expect like the woman to say a certain thing or to be like wedding crazy. So
Mm-hmm.
is that something that you were, I guess, like subtly trying to subvert? Because if this
Yeah, I mean, I love that you point out those lines because they were ones that we came up with Jennifer
Oh
actually
wow, okay.
trying to because well, we talked about a couple of things. One, the original script had the gender flip in it, so the really wanted the big traditional wedding for all the kind of classic reasons, and the woman was like, I don't really need a wedding, and slightly had some fears about weddings because of her parents' divorce. So that was always a part of it. But also, I think we also talked about what does it mean for people to be getting married for the first time at this stage in their life, right? Like that's a undeniable story point, and I always found it really interesting because I think that there have been a lot of articles, even just in the New York Times, about like the marriage rates go down, but long-term couples still, there's still as many long-term couples.
Yeah.
Relationships have shed light on that. There's many different ways to be together with someone. And so we wanted to sort of, at least, as you say, sort of subtly explore. We didn't want to go too deep because that's not really what this movie is doing, but hopefully the roots show, which is like, and a lot of audiences really responded to that. It was like, I love that she is in love with the man, she's with him, but she doesn't need a ring and a dress to make herself.
Yeah.
And that resonated with Jennifer and with me and with everyone else. And then of course we still sort of deliver that moment. Her character Arthi learns the importance of tradition and how it might actually make her feel safer given her wounds from before. So there's important relationship arcs going on with the characters underneath all that craziness.
Yeah, because I even thought, about learning the value of something traditional. Like even when she says later in the movie, I fucking love this cake knife, there is sort of like tissue there that I think that I connected to. Yeah, I think it's something with for some reason I've been rewatching a lot of Friends. Like the first season, I've been watching it for the last like week just to have. And there's something about that mid 90s like expectation of what a certain character says, and then maybe that's why it stuck out to me more. Rewatch Shotgun Wedding.
Interesting.
Yeah. I don't typically like to ask people about working with actors, but I mean, I want to know sort of what it's like to hand Jennifer Coolidge a giant gun. just because I'm glad like the world is catching up with her.
Yeah, totally. Me too. I mean, well, the Jennifer Coolidge story, and I've always been obsessed with her. I tried not to reveal that I could recite all of her lines from Best in Show when I first met her. I'm gonna save that fanboy moment for later. But she I called her and we had a fun conversation, and I was like, why don't you come to the Dominican Republic and make this really fun? We'll live in a bubble, a beautiful location. She's like, well, I'm already doing that in Hawaii. I had no idea what she was doing. Of course, it
Right.
turned out to be White Lotus. But I did say, do you get to fire a gun in that one? And with season one, she did not. So that did intrigue her, and I think that was a big part of why she kind of wanted to do it. It was something different, and it's a semi-automatic weapon that she's firing. So she did a lot of rehearsal to make it look effortless and
Oh
good. It's
yeah.
one of those things that we see in movies so often. It actually seems easy, but it's kind of not.
Yeah.
It's dangerous, of course. So she rehearsed every day out on the lawn with the armsmen, and it was really fun. So on the day, but I made sure that no one could see her rehearse because I wanted everyone to have that experience like the audience does in the pool, to see her pick up the gun like a professional.
Something about the floppy hat. I sort of wanted, I was like, I want to be her for Halloween. And just that shot alone. I want to get like a framed picture of her firing that gun and put it in like my movie room in the basement, just because it's such a absurd, wonderful thing. And the fact that maybe Jennifer Coolidge is at a point in her life now where she's just like, I'm gonna shoot something, but I'm also gonna be on vacation at the same time. That's sort of a great thing that
I mean,
she deserves.
she deserves it. I will say she's such a hard worker that
Yeah.
she's making smart choices, but it's not like it's out of her love for what she
Yeah.
does. She brings her heart. She's kind of everything that you'll hope. She's
Mhm.
generous and kind, very humble, and just off center enough that you're just waiting to see what she's going to say next. And that's, I think, one of her things that she does well, is keeping people in
Yeah.
that seat.
Yeah. Someone admitted to me in public that they've never seen like the Christopher Guest oeuvre. And I was like, number one, I don't know how we've been
How's
friends.
that possible?
I don't understand. So they're actually coming over tonight, and I was like, I pulled out my copy of Best in Show because I want to make them watch it. Um,
It's like it's a genre unto itself that it seems like he created and bested,
mhm.
and it's now there's so many shows that have used that mockumentary style, but he still does it the best. I mean, I've seen those movies like
Like a
50 times.
million times. Yeah,
Mhm.
great. Um, I guess one last thing that I wanted to prod you about. Um, I'm a big fan of Trophy Wife.
Oh,
I was
great.
very mad when that show was canceled. That was another great. It's a great cast.
Yeah,
I
it
don't
was
really
it
have
was
a question. Yeah, I don't really have a question for you about it. I sort of just want to playfully ask you that if they ever decided to revive that show, if you would ever come back on board. But I mean,
I love that show. I mean, I never get asked about that, so I'm so thrilled that you asked, because it was a great experience. It was very much an ensemble. We shot
yeah.
it outside of pilot season. That was when pilot season actually happened. So
Mhm.
to get, I mean, mind-blowing actors like Bradley Whitford, Marcia Gay Harden, I was just in heaven because we were
Yeah.
kind of an oddly timed pilot. And it was a great cast. It was fun. It had heart. I mean, it has all the things that I generally like, and it was grounded. And it had a pretty strong and mighty following. I discovered when it got canceled, which is sometimes when you discover those
Yeah.
things. But I've always that's held a special place. So I'm glad that you responded to it. It makes me happy.
Yeah. I stupidly, you know, anytime someone brings up like shows that were gone too soon, anytime I mention that, that's always one of the ones that I'm like Trophy Wife. And I feel like as soon as I mention it, I always get like a flurry of people that are like, yeah,
Yeah,
so.
it was also network television was changing. I think it was on a 9 o'clock slot. That
Mhm.
that title was challenging for some people, but we knew going in. So it was, it's one of those. I that's one of the gifts of streaming, is people can go back and see it now.
Yeah, that's true. Well, thank you, Jason, so much for your time. I love the movie so much.
Thank you, Joe. Yeah, it means a lot. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I think it's really funny, but it has like, I don't want to say like it has heart, but I mean it has like it has something to say, and I think that's why people are responding to it. So
Great.
uh
Thank Thanks, Joey.
yeah.
Have a great trip to New York.
Oh yeah, yeah, I'm sure I'll be tweeting about it nonstop. So.
Yeah, great. Okay.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you.
Have a good day.
Bye. You too. Thanks.
Thanks.